Welcome to Dear Diaspora, a podcast celebrating the African diaspora and the change makers, innovators, and entrepreneurs working to make our world a better one to live in. I'm your host, Ndulwa Koa. Let's get started. Thank you so much for tuning in to Dear Diaspora. I am so excited to finally launch this podcast and share it with you all. And like the intro said, this podcast will be celebrating the entrepreneurs, creatives, and innovators and change makers across the globe who are working to make our world a better one to live in. And before I kind of get into what you can expect from this podcast, I wanted to just make sure that we all have an understanding of what the African diaspora is. When I first shared this idea with my brother, and I was like, I'm starting a podcast. He was like, oh, great. He's like, but what's the diaspora? And so after thinking about it, I was like, this probably isn't something that people learn in school. I sure didn't. And so the African Union defines the African diaspora as consisting of people of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent and the building of the African Union. And I really like that definition. But to put it in simpler terms, I feel that the diaspora is just anyone that has African ancestry. So anyone Black around the world, I believe, is part of the diaspora. And I always just think of Issa Rae and, that moment when she was like, I'm rooting for everybody Black. And I love that, absolutely love it. And essentially that's what I want this podcast to be. So just rooting for everybody Black, no matter where you live. If you're doing amazing work, I want to talk about it and I want to share it with people. And so yes, that is essentially what you can expect from this podcast. All right, so now that that's out of the way, I wanted to share just a little bit about me and my story and, why I have such an interest in the African diaspora. And so I am originally from Lusaka, Zambia, and Zambia is a country in southern Africa, home of the Victoria Falls. If you ever get a chance to go visit, it's just super beautiful and amazing. So yeah, that's where I'm from. I've lived in the United States for almost 14 years now. My mom moved to the U.S. first, actually. So she moved here in 2000 as an immigrant looking for better work opportunities and just, looking to create a better life for her children. And so she moved here, worked her butt off. She's an amazing woman. And after 5 years, she was able to file for us and bring us over. So my brother and I joined her in 2005 and have lived in the U.S. ever since. And so I have had, the privilege of being able to travel back home a few times now. I think I've been back maybe three or four times since we moved over here. And I am super grateful for the ability to do that, first of all, and then also just for the ability to stay connected to family and friends that I grew up with back home. And so I've always just had such a deep interest in Africa and Zambia specifically. And so during my undergrad, I studied international studies because that just made the most sense for me at the time. I thought I would, go work for the UN and, get into international development type work. But after, really studying a lot of international development approaches and things, I quickly realized that, the traditional model of using aid, for example, as a tool for development is not really the most sustainable. And if y'all would like to read a really good book about that, Dambisa Moyo's Dead Aid is super good. It's a few years old, but it's just super informative and just shows you, how much aid has been pumped into Africa over the last few decades, and how it really hasn't done much to, develop the continent. And so, so I don't know if I still would like to work for the UN. It just depends. But I went back to school and I got my MBA because I have an interest in business. And I also recently got like a project management certification. And so I'm hoping to be able to use my education in the near future to contribute somehow to the continent. And so I'm not exactly sure how I'll get there yet. But I will get there at some point. And so, I've always had just like a deep interest in like African culture, African affairs. And so one of the reasons I actually wanted to start this podcast was to have conversations with people who are living like on and off the continent, just doing really amazing work. And so I feel like there's so much out there to work on, just depending on what like your, like your thing is, whether it's like, increasing access to education or, jobs and employment or healthcare. There are a lot of people out there that are doing really cool work. And so I wanted to talk to those people and see, how they went about doing it, what their successes have been, and, what some of their struggles have been and things like that. And so I am so looking forward to having those conversations and sharing them with you all. And, hopefully, you can take something away from those conversations and, be inspired to like start something of your own or, work with someone to create something. And so, so that's kind of my motivation behind this podcast. And I really, really hope that you connect to, the conversations that happen on this podcast. And, hopefully we can collaborate and connect with each other as well. So a couple things that are inspiring me right now that I think you should check out or look into. So first, if you haven't heard Beyonce's new album, the Lion King, The Gift album, it is so excellent, and I love just all the collaborations and, all the features with the different African artists. A couple of my favorite songs, Already is one of my top, Keys to the Kingdom with Tiwa Savage, and then Burna Boy has like a song on there by himself, which I also love. So I highly encourage you to check that out. And another really cool thing, Burna Boy's new album, well, it probably won't be new by the time this comes out, but Burna Boy's album is excellent, and I just love his particular style of music. I think it's very different from what you kind of are hearing from other African artists, and he's actually calling his genre Afrofusion, so I think that's really cool. So check that out. And then if you haven't heard of the 2019 Year of Return campaign that Ghana is doing, please check that out. It's currently like a campaign to encourage people of African descent to go visit, live, and work in Ghana. So I really love that. And then lastly, I would say check out just what's happening with the Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think that's like a major move because Africa currently is trading more with like Europe and Asia more than it is with like within the African continent. And so please check that out. I think that's going to be something that's going to make a huge difference in the next a few years. And so, yes, check those things out. And I wanted to quickly mention that I am also currently working to help my grandmother fundraise for a clinic that's going to be built in the southern province of Zambia, in Mbeza specifically. So if you go to the website, deardiasporashow.com, and click on projects, I talk a little bit about it there. And there's a link to the fundraising page. So yeah, check that out. And I also wanted you to learn more about sponsorship and things. So if you are interested in sponsoring one of the episodes or just like the podcast in general, feel free to send me an email at deardiasporashow@gmail.com. And I will share more information about becoming a sponsor. I anticipate growing a listener base of people that are interested in entrepreneurship and professional development, growing their skills and, networking and things like that. And then also people that are interested in travel and just Africa in general. And so, if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please hit me up. And that is all that I have for y'all. Share this with a friend and, subscribe to the podcast and leave a review and rate us if you like what you hear. Thanks for listening to Dear Diaspora. If you like what you hear, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. You can find us on Instagram at Dear Diaspora or visit our website at deardiasporashow.com. Thank you and talk to you next week.